Hey everyone, welcome to Trusting Our Men Again. We're so excited. I'm here with Maddie, and we are here because we figured we would give you guys just a little bit of context and sort of behind the scenes of what it is that we are talking about as we go into this series. And we thought, what better way to kick off the event than to just have you guys come on in and see what it is that we're really intending here with this series for you.
Yes. Hello and welcome. So we're going to be covering such a diverse range of topics, and there's going to be a lot of things that we want to share in this right here so that we don't have to always repeat it again, and we're all on the same page. So we have agreements that we want to set with everyone listening. We have some definitions and some terms that we're going to be using throughout the duration of this interview series that we want to clarify right now up front. We have some disclaimers that we want to share, and we just want to come to you to share why we are doing this to begin with, what we are so excited about. We haven't even started the interview series. We begin tomorrow with recording all of them. So we just wanted to get this energy on camera of the excitement, because after the interview series, we're going to have a whole bunch more knowledge, but we want to record our nerves and our excitement, like the jitters that we have right now as we go into this really big project we're going to be tackling and unpacking with you.
Yeah. And I think, we really recognize that this project in a way is a little bit counterculture. It's a little bit different than a lot of the rhetoric that you're hearing possibly in your world, and maybe not, and the whole idea is that we are really wanting to open dialogue and open hearts and have us all come together and really explore our own biases, our own privileges, our own perspectives, and come with like a curious beginner's mind. And that's really, that's the energy and the heart of this project. I also realized, just in case people don't know us, we should probably introduce ourselves.
We should, yeah.
So Maddie, why don't you start?
Yes.
Okay. Who are you, Maddie?
Who am I? So I am a transformational life coach, a podcast host, and a retreat leader over at maddiemoon.com. My story, teeny tiny story, I'll make it very, very brief. We have a lot to cover. But my story started with eating disorders and recovery and bodybuilding and getting really, really, really into this world of rigidity and looking perfect and being perfect, also that I could cope with really, when you get down to the core of it, of being a woman who was soft, and I was fighting and I was trying to swim upstream all of my life of this uphill battle, trying to make sure I always looked like I had my shit together, which led me into very toxic behaviors and toxic thought patterns and pushing everyone out of my life. And so about 6 years ago, I went down this path of self-love. I mean, that's really the best way to put it, but finally giving myself grace to let go and to be to have that unconditional sense of freedom to explore in a way that I wasn't allowed to explore as a child, because there was a lot of ways that I felt very repressed from exploring. And I'm sure that will come out in this interview series. And so now what I do is I teach masculine-minded and sometimes perfectionistic women how to step into their feminine flow, both through embodiment, but also through speaking and through vulnerability and through releasing. So that's the kind of coaching I do. And then on my podcast, Mind, Body, Musings, we are covering all sorts of topics from relationships to spirituality to acro yoga and other forms of embodiment, the divine feminine, and currently traveling around the States, just kind of going from place to place, doing the nomad thing. So that's me. What about you?
So by the way, Maddie and I both have had stints of nomadic life, and I feel like, well, we'll talk about this later, but we've had all sorts of funny ways in which we've bonded over really random things, like finishing shampoo bottles, which is another story.
So good.
So good. Or candles. Look at this one in the bottom.
Finishing.
So as for me, I am an embodiment coach, and I came to this work through being a certified holistic health coach who started to really help guide women back to their power and their confidence and their intuition and their body wisdom through sensuality, through embodiment. So what I really do is I help women, very similar to Maddie, I help women and really anyone who identifies as a woman to move out of this go, go, go mode and and drop in and soften and take their time and learn how to flow. And not to the point where we're only doing that. The idea is balance, right? But to really get yourself back to a place where you feel truly tapped in and connected so that you feel vibrant, alive, and like sexy. And so I think it's really cool that the two of us are coming together to do something that's really out of our comfort zone. And I want to speak a little bit to the project and how it sort of got birthed. So, at the beginning of this year, I was really starting to get the message that I needed to start to speak to men. And it was so strange because I've been someone who's been working in a women's only space and guiding women through sensual movement and coaching and workshops and women's circles for over 8-9 years or something like that. And so I never really was thinking about the guys. I've been so comfortable in the space of being with women. And I felt really passionate about women's issues, as I know you do. And so I've always been in that lens of like, oh my God, there's so much to fight for, the patriarchy, like there's so many things we still need to work on, equal pay, women's, even right now, like the stuff that's going on with our bodies and legislation about controlling our bodies. There's just a lot of things that we still have to work on as a society. And so for me, I was very much like, I need to help women feel safe in their bodies because there's so much toxic messaging happening that plasters onto our feminine bodies that stops us from trusting our wisdom, our body wisdom, and our feminine intuition. So I wasn't thinking about the guys. And yet this message kept coming through. And initially I was really like looking at male embodiment and wanting to see how do men plug in, what stops men from feeling safe in their, their embodiment, with their bodies, with their primal sexuality. And around, as the years sort of progressed, we had so many things happening in the US that really brought up so many women's issues. But at the same time, what was happening behind the scenes was I had a lot of guy friends who were coming to me privately because they felt comfortable and were sharing with me how incredibly scared they were because they're good guys and they just didn't know what to do. They, the rules are being rewritten and they were like, I don't know what the rules are anymore. Like, how do I do this? And it really came from this place of like an open heart. And so I reached out to Maddie and because we had been, vibing about the shampoo bottle and lots more. And because I love her podcast. And I was like, hey, I really feel like it would be so cool and interesting for us to go into this exploration as two curious, women and see what is actually coming up for the guys, because we're not really talking about that so much, and to see where can we meet in really open-hearted dialogue in a place of partnership and understanding. And there's going to be places like, I'm so aware there's going to be places where I'll be super triggered. You might be triggered, listening in, you might be triggered, because these are difficult conversations. But there was just this burning desire to be like, these conversations need to happen. Because I think the biggest thing about repression is whenever we have those things that are sort of irking in us, right? Like that shadowy part, the shadowy emotions, the more we hold it back, the bigger it gets. And we're seeing that in the collective. We're seeing that in our politics. All the things we sort of ignored for a while are now coming up times 10. And so it's really important that we start to talk about this in a safe space and see where are the areas that we're like, oh, I don't know about this yet. Or, oh, that's an interesting perspective I never thought of.
Yes. Oh my God. I love it. And when you came to me, I think one of the things that spoke the most to me definitely was the male embodiment, because when I do the work that I do with my teachers, or I go to courses around polarity, because polarity is one of my main focuses, there's a lot of different ways that we as the feminine get into our bodies, and we're very sensual. And it's this like slow honey-like dripping movement. And it does something within us when we feel that way. We feel juicy, we feel alive, we feel open. And for the Men, and another term we probably will be using throughout this interview series, is the masculine, which we can talk about in a bit. For the masculine, what is that way that they really get into their bodies, and they call them their nervous system in the way that we are learning to call them our nervous systems? This isn't talked about. This isn't really something that you can easily find. And that's where this really started, is how do you get really embodied whenever you need to access something within yourself, some kind of spiritual quality that you want to physically feel in your body? What do you go out there and do? How do you move? So that was really intriguing to me. But on top of that, with all of this, all of the work that I'm really exploring with polarity of the two opposite ends of someone in a sense leading and someone in a sense surrendering, but in a sacred way. How do we keep this alive, which creates this like sexual fire that's really hot, while also having consent, while also learning nonverbal consent, while learning how to do this dance of polarity and keep it alive while everyone feels safe? And so that's why I think it's so incredibly important to pick the brains of men who are going out there and leading these men's circles and gatherings and teaching other men how to show up for not only the world, but their individual women and their families. Because I think that these two energies within ourselves, the masculine and feminine, are so equally important, because in order to be feminine and to feel soft and feel safe, you also have to have somewhat of a, I don't want to say the word boundary, but almost like a safety fence, like a fence where a little tree is being planted and being born, it needs to know that it's not going to be stomped on. So we create this masculine warrior energy within ourselves, but then we also have our counterpart out into the world. And this is dual work. We must learn as women how to create our own boundaries and say yes and say no and really mean it and be responsible. But also as men, they can help with this huge project by becoming that themselves, by really knowing how to also guide us and also lead us, but also learn how to listen to us and help us speak our truth. So while me and you, we've both been discussing how we work with women, I just want to make this very clear from the start that we're interviewing only men in this series. And therefore, we're going to be speaking directly to men and women and anything that you identify with. We are speaking to everyone. Our own experiences are working with women and anyone who identifies as a woman for you. But it's very important that everyone listening to this right now, you know that this is for you, this is for your partner, this is for anyone in your life. This is work that we are doing together as counterparts so that we can all heal and move into this direction that we're wanting to move, where everyone feels safe and heard together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'd say, also we sort of chose a very particular lens, right? So we are going in very aware that we are two women of a particular profile, of a particular social class, in a particular industry. And we are primarily working to get the perspective of men who are also in this industry. I don't know if how they identify or, what their sexual preferences are, but I'm going to guess that a majority are probably in heterosexual relationships or consider themselves heterosexual. But we by no means are saying this is the only conversation that needs to be had. And I think it's really important for us to acknowledge the plight of so many people, especially, people of the LGBTQI community and other minorities, and the voices that are silenced and continue to be silenced in the system that we live in. However, we can, and also we sort of want to just interview absolutely everyone and talk about this forever and ever and ever. But we also, have so many other projects and both have full-time, client rosters. And so we decided that we're going to speak to this specific dynamic that primarily is that conversation in our industry between, women and men. That doesn't mean that a lot of the conversations cannot be applied to your reality, whatever that may be. But I think that, we are really aware that that conversation changes a little bit, and so things like, for example, the Me Too movement, right? There's been a lot of backlash, or I guess criticism around the fact that, Me Too in a way was also not inclusive, because a lot of the men who had their own Me Too stories weren't really being involved in that situation. And we can get into why that is. And, a lot of women, I'm sure, will come in and say, well, it's our time now, like, let the men step aside. And this is these are all the things that are so juicy. And this is what we want to get into in all of these interviews. So we really are coming at it from this place of curiosity and open to everything. Doesn't mean we're going to agree with everything, but we're willing to listen. And we believe that active listening and compassionate listening is actually what's going to move us forward. Because ultimately what we're finding, and I think the reason why we decided to put aside all the other things that we're doing in our world and come do this project, is because we're realizing that we're looping. Collectively, we're having the same conversation and the same fight over and over again. And if you're in a romantic relationship, or really just any relationship, friendship, could be with a boss, could be with your mom, if you're having the same conversation over and over and over, and you keep walking away and not feeling satisfied and not feeling like you're moving forward, it means you're not using the right tools, or there's something missing there that's having you guys finally, come together and walk away with an action plan of, hey, what's next? And so I think what we're really hoping to do here is to create a space for that. Like, how can we actually break the pattern of the looping that's happening in our collective conversation? Because we want to move forward, and we believe you do too. Like, we believe everyone wants to actually move towards love, and everyone wants to move towards like more passionate, hot, lovemaking. Mm-hmm. So we're hoping that these conversations will help with that.
Yeah. And like you were saying earlier, we're going to be covering a very specific realm of this. Like, we're speaking with all these men, right? And I want to make it very clear that by speaking with men and hearing their perspective and their point of view, in no way, shape, or form are we trying to make the men's voices louder.
Oh,
we
yeah.
are getting curious. We're getting curious. What makes you feel embodied? Because the masculine, the men feeling embodied and learning how to release their anger in healthy ways, learn how to release their sexual shame in healthy ways, learning how to step up into leadership in healthy ways will benefit us all of us. And that's why it's so important that my desire is, if you feel some conversation is missing from this interview series, which you probably will, because there's so many conversations that need to be had, my hope is that that inspires you in some way to go out and have these conversations. Extend it. Don't put all the pressure on this one series to cover everything, because it won't. Nothing ever can. Not one thing can ever cover everything. It's all these different layers. So hopefully this conversation here can inspire you to say, what now is missing? What's the next step? Where else can we go? And then have those conversations with the speakers, the leaders, the teachers, yourself. If you are one of those people, get involved with other people, and you start to create meetup groups and have community and speak on those topics and fill in the gaps, because there's so many different areas we want to be covered and we want to unpack and we want to look at. And that's why curiosity is so important for us. We want to be curious. So that's something we are very dedicated and committed to throughout the series, is coming at every conversation from an angle of curiosity rather than fact, rather than black and white. Yeah. Okay. Whew. That feels really good.
Yeah. I'm thinking we could do this. I would love for us to read to everyone watching and listening just what we wrote as we were brainstorming the little area about our beliefs, sort of what it is that really pulled us into this, and then talk a little bit about our agreements for the container of this project.
Sounds beautiful.
Okay, I'll do the first few points. You can do the next. Okay. So we wrote, we have always been and always will be committed to helping women feel safe, and we are also concerned with the experience of our men. We believe we can stand in both truths. In a time when it's easy to stew in the anger of our past, we are choosing to see our men in their full future potential. In a time when the system is trying to pin us against each other, we believe no one wins if one of us loses. you want to keep going?
Yeah. In a time when the trend is to shame, to blame, and to other or finger point, we believe that coming closer with compassion will be what heals us all. We believe in embodied union and human partnership.
Awesome. Yeah. And so, this was just sort of a starting point for where it is that we really want to anchor in terms of the energy of going into these conversations. And we hope that you anchor into that same energy with us. And who knows what might come up for you as you go through some of these interviews and listen.
Agreements time?
Agreements time.
We covered some of these already, but we just want to make them very crystal clear for all of you. Okay, agreements. We agree to come at every angle with curiosity rather than fact or a black and white way of thinking. Mm-hmm. We agree to listen with open hearts to both our guests, each other, and you as the listeners. We do acknowledge that we are two white women with privilege, and white and Lebanese.
White passing.
And we therefore are not trying to speak for all races, sexual orientations, and genders. Our personal experiences will be shared, but we understand, acknowledge they are not the experiences of everyone. And the last thing that we wanted to share as an agreement is that for some people, this conversation that we are having of opening up the realm of what men feel and what men are going through may feel like it's too soon for that. And we want to acknowledge that this right now really is a space for women to be speaking up and sharing their truths. And that said, by bringing in the conversation of men who we have hand-selected that are doing the work in this world and are leading from a place of an open heart, not toxicity, they're not perfect by any means, but they are doing the work on this planet to be leaders. We feel that hearing what they have to say and how they're getting embodied is not dismissing the movement that's currently going on with us as a divine feminine rising.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, I think it's like, there are so many places that exist out there, and rightfully so, where we are fighting for all the places where, women are still not equal, women are still not being heard. So there's spaces for that. And I think what we're coming in here with is creating a slightly different sort of space so that you can integrate all of it, because that's really what we want: integration, embodied union, coming together, right? This is the idea. But there aren't really places where we get to have conversations with men who really genuinely are trying to be our allies and are a little confused about how to do it. Or maybe they have some ideas and want to share them with us. But, we need to really be in the energy of being open to listening. And I think that there is this whole idea, and this came up, as we were diving into a lot of preparation and research and just, getting excited about this project. We took in so much information, and we watched, documentaries and listened to podcasts and all these things. And one thing that for me kept coming up over and over again was this idea of being able to stand in two truths. And this idea of, it's not this or that. It's not black or white. It's really this and that. And I don't know what happened at some point where we all felt like the only way is I'm right, you're wrong, right? If you think about, again, I'm going to probably go back to this analogy over and over again, because I really feel it's so true. If you are in a relationship and you're having a fight, and your number one concern is deciding who's right and who's wrong, you will never get anywhere. Because there's never one person, it's really rare that like one person is 100% wrong and 100% one person is 100% right. It's not a thing. Even if it's 99% and 1%, there's always a tango happening. And I think this is the same thing, as I heard a lot of conflict resolution and mediator types speak to gender relations, I found that this is really a big thing that comes up for them, where like people are just feeling like, oh, well, I need to, just because I've been oppressed and we still have, the world is still not, hasn't created equal space for us. that automatically means I'm 100% right. And everything that you're going to say is 100% wrong. And this isn't just in gender dynamics, right? Like this can be applied to all sorts of situations. And I think this is what's actually stopping us from progressing, the same way that that fight is just going to loop over and over again if you keep trying to be right instead of trying to understand where's the other person coming from. You can disagree and still listen and understand, but really coming to terms with the fact that everything is sort of this in-between place. And so hopefully that's a muscle that these conversations will help you stretch. And I know it'll do so. I know it's done so for us. I mean, as we were doing some of this research, like we were like text each other and we're like, whoa, mind blown. What is even happening over here? Yeah. Because I think, I don't know about you, but I had a lot of things that I had assumptions about that have changed a little bit. And there was a lot of things that were incredibly triggering for me, as someone who considers myself a feminist, and finding out all this stuff and being like,
yeah.
No.
Yeah. I had that experience yesterday of like just going down the rabbit hole of deep diving and reading all of this, getting these perspectives. And something that I learned yesterday, going off of what you said, which I absolutely adore, I think this is so important. I always say like two things can exist at once. And that's really the case, especially in fights. One thing that I really loved hearing yesterday too is that, because I read it specifically yesterday, was that when we are owning something, a lot of times people trade responsibility for guilt. And they think that instead of just simply being responsible and saying, yes, I did this, maybe, I fucked up, I did this. Instead of that, it is, I feel guilt. And then you go into the shame and then the self-loathing, and that is not going to be helping anybody. It doesn't help you. And what we really want is for each individual person to come into this place of self-love and honoring themselves and to get to that next level of actually being responsible for what all of our parts are. We cannot get into the guilt first because we get lost there and stuck there. We'll never be able to get to a place of just pure responsibility, ownership, and moving forward if there is that big chunk of guilt involved, because it's like, I don't know, you just get immediately stuck into it like quicksand. Can't get to that next level.
100%.
So trading that's really important throughout this series, is keeping that in mind, is that we want guilt off the table. We want it off. We want it away. Responsibility is great. And that in itself is triggering, responsibility. And I think that might be why so many of us go to guilt first, because it's a way that we don't necessarily feel quite as triggered. I'm sure some people feel triggered throughout the guilt, but it's, I don't know. Do you know what I'm saying? It's almost like this way that we get distracted from that feeling of triggering and owning that truth.
Yeah. And I think also, I'm just writing stuff down so I don't forget it. Like this, we grew up in a very like punitive system. Like, there was a lot of like, oh, you got in trouble and had to like sit in the back of the classroom, or like your parents yelled at you for whatever. And there was this like shaming and guilting that happened, and we experienced that growing up. So there's an internalized, it's understandable, right? Like there's this internalized, oh, this is the way, if I shame someone else, they're going to learn. And they're going to change their ways, right? Because I did so, or like that's how my parents got me to change my behavior when I was younger. And I think as we, we keep talking, or you hear about it in the collective, this idea of like, divine feminine rising, or some people will say women rising, but that's problematic and that's a separate conversation. Yeah. But the reason why there is this shift, we are moving into a different chapter of humanity. And part of that is really coming back to these feminine values of compassion and understanding and love and heart-based conversations, where it's like, oh, actually, it's a lot more, it's a lot more sustainable to not have a very, punitive system. We look at the way, the prison system and the legal system set up in the US, and it doesn't really work, right? Based on, clearly we can see how it doesn't work. Yet now there's this whole movement of like restorative justice that's coming up, where it's about, sitting, around a table and really hearing everyone's perspectives. And I think this is an important piece. The other thing I wanted to mention that came up as you were speaking was the idea that and I see this come up so many times, and I'm so surprised that no one has made this distinction, and that it hasn't just become, I guess, I don't know, normal conversation. We distinguish between the patriarchy and man as an individual. And I think this is so important because so often it's like, oh, this whole idea of like all men are this way, or it's all the men's fault, you know, which can happen quite often. I know that I'm 100% guilty of that, you know.
Totally. Me too.
You know, it's like, and these are places that we need, you know, you and I are also this is great because we're looking at a whole bunch of stuff where I'm like, oh, I used to, you know, use all sorts of terminology and say all sorts of things with my girlfriends. Cause it's like, you know, there was a place of hurt. There was a wounding that it came from. Unconsciously. And there's some places where I'm like, I might need to change that language, or I might need to not speak to that. And so I think it's really, really important for everyone to understand that we really distinguish between the two, because actually the system of the patriarchy, and we might want to get into discussing language for a couple of minutes since we're in this world right now, but the patriarchy is really a system that has given, you know, men, specifically white men, a lot of privilege, where the laws have been written, you know, the societal the social mores, like just the way that everything has been set up has made it a lot easier for the men and a lot harder for the women, and definitely the most challenging for everyone who identifies as something else, right? And so the patriarchy itself has also been incredibly toxic and challenging to men in its own way. And I think this is part of what we will probably be exploring. No, we'll definitely be exploring in these interviews, I'm sure, is what is the difference between, you know, the individual and the system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I was realizing this as we were doing research for this project, that I didn't even recognize the fact that every time I said the patriarchy, I was referring to men. Like that, it was the men. It was the men. Like the men are the ones that have made body image such a problem. Because like that is my background, is being in the bodybuilding world and eating disorders. And when I dove into that world of figuring out where did all this pressure come from to look a certain way and be a certain way, and it was the patriarchy trying to keep women busy so that the men could run things. And as long as we were working on our weight and working on our beauty and working on being the perfect housewife, we were busy and we were distracted. And so whenever I was in that world, like 5 years ago, really unpacking that, and I discovered the patriarchy, it made total sense. But then somewhere along the way, which is not too surprising, but the patriarchy in my mind started to mean men are doing this. Men are making this a thing. And so that distinction is really, really, really powerful and really important. And that might be something that we want to find a speaker to specifically dive in about. How would they define, as a man that's out there being a leader, how would they define the difference between the patriarchy and
writing it down?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And you know, the other thing is, like, even on that, the topic of body image, like actually the patriarchy makes it really challenging for men as well. Like, we see they have so much pressure going to the gym, like doing their, like, you know, oh, you need to look this way. Like there is
emotionally too.
Yeah. There's, you know, yeah, I'm thinking in the body image, we're 100% emotionally. There's a whole nother level. Like you're either too emotional, you're not emotional enough. Everyone's confused. Like there's such a double bind for guys that is equally challenging. And that's other than, you know, all these things that we discovered about all these laws that are actually pretty anti-men, which is interesting. Very controversial, but very, very, very interesting that I didn't know about. Like, I'm just happy I got educated. And so we're hoping you guys will be interested in hearing about that as well. I'm sure it'll come up at some point. But yeah, I myself too, like when I talk about like marketing and I'm like, oh, it's the patriarchy, like trying to like stuff me down and do it this way and and you know, over this weekend I started thinking, like, is this the patriarchy, or has it become one big thing in my head, like it's the system? And really it's a combination of capitalism and the patriarchy and, you know, the rules and like all these different things, and I sort of mesh it together and just be like, well, it's easy to just blame the patriarchy for everything. And so I'm curious to also examine that, knowing that there legitimately is a bunch of shit that's the problem, that it's the patriarchy's fault. Like, you know, but it's become a bit of a scapegoat, I think. And even in my own life, I started to notice that I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, just blame it all on the patriarchy.
Yeah.
Like,
maybe a scapegoat. We use that as a scapegoat in exchange for, I don't want to say responsibility in a sense that we are responsible for all of this stuff. That's not what I mean, but some sense of responsibility.
Yeah.
Like there, in every instance, two things can exist at once. Yes, the patriarchy can be to blame for quite a large amount of things. And also we could be responsible for keeping some of the system alive. I don't know. We'll dive into this.
Totally. And a bunch of internalized patriarchy, internalized misogyny. Like there's a lot of stuff that, the same way we internalize the punitive system, the way of being like, no, you're wrong. It's like these things happen. It doesn't make us bad people.
No.
What makes us, well, no one's ever a bad person really, but what makes us slackers, I'm going to say that, is not looking at it, not examining it, just going about our day and just being like, it is what it is. I can't do anything about it. I think it's like, that's the piece that's really important, is for us to come in and be like, actually, I can make a difference. And here's how. Let me start by examining my own stuff. Mm-hmm. Let's talk for a moment.
Language?
Yes, I was going to talk about, do you want to talk a little bit about masculine and feminine? And for those who maybe aren't so familiar with this world and what it means?
Yes. And you can add to this anything that you would like to add. Right. The masculine and feminine are terms that I use all the time. So I might be saying it all the time. So I just want to make this very clear that the masculine and feminine are two energies within every single human being. It is yin and it is yang. So there is one that is a state of more internal, the feminine. It's wisdom living within the body. It's like the moon. It's the emotional side of each human being. It's creativity. It's nourishment. It's Mother Earth. It's that grounding sense. It's a very maternal energy. Again, we all have it within ourselves. The physical embodiment of the feminine is female. That does not mean that a female has an emotional body of the feminine, though. There are many women that identify much more with being primarily masculine, especially emotionally. Maybe you don't feel like you're super empathic and you think very structurally or logically, and that's absolutely fine, especially if it feels good and it works for you. But keep in mind, you still have the feminine within you. You still have the ability to receive and to be nourished and to be nourishing to others. Mm-hmm. Is that all I want to say on the feminine? Yes, it's a very soft energy. I'll land with that. So the masculine is like this sun energy. So when you think about the sun, you think about activity, brightness, going outward. That's what the masculine is. It's knowledge, whereas for the feminine, it's wisdom. We have knowledge. Each one of us has this within us. It's that warrior energy, whereas the feminine might be more of like a goddess. Not just a goddess that's drinking green juices on the beach wearing a white gown, but a goddess of all different shapes and sizes and emotions, the whole caboodle. For the masculine is the master of time and space. And so when I say that, I mean the masculine is in charge of a container. It is a very present energy. It is the part of me and the part of you and the part of everyone that has never changed. Is that deep dive into consciousness. When you meditate, you're going really into your masculine. You're clearing all the stuff out and you're being with a space of nothingness. That's what the masculine is, whereas the feminine is all the energy that flows in, all the emotions, all the ups and downs, all the juiciness, the rage, like a tsunami, but also like a river. So this is all happening within you. You have the ability to be in your masculine and to be present and to be aware of boundaries and containers and hold space for people. And you also have the ability within you to be so connected to your heart and broke open and feel all the things all at once. So masculine and feminine do not apply to genders. These are just energies of yin and yang. And you can think about this as the sun and the moon if that feels better.
Love it. The other thing that the image that always comes to mind for me that I learned a long time ago that helps me to sort of anchor into it is the idea of the river, right? Is that a river is made up of two elements. It can't exist without these two elements. One is the water that flows within the river, and then there's the riverbed that actually contains the water. And so in that sense, the riverbed is, and I believe this is actually a David Deida image or example, although I'm not 100% sure, but I did want to credit it in case it was. So early on, as I started to learn about masculine, feminine energies, this is how I really anchored into that it's like, you can't have the existence of a river with just the water, because then it's just water. And you can't just have a riverbed, because then it's just like earth. But the two combined make this, make a river. And the same way you and I are sitting here, and like, I might have moments where I'm like, even just this is like circulating like very feminine energy that wants to move in me because I can't sit still. And also my masculine is keeping track of time. Like, let's make sure we wrap, like, so we have these pieces that are in us, and it's just going to come up in different conversations, because we're going to bring in different teachers from different lineages who have different, who may be using this terminology naturally. And so we want to make sure that you guys were just really familiar with it beforehand and understood that we are by no means referencing a man or a woman, because ideally, and I don't know about you, and I don't know how they teach it, but for me, when I work with my clients, I'm like, let's get you connected to this feminine energy, which you've been disconnected from for so long, because we've been living in a world that reveres masculine energy and structure and going somewhere and getting shit done and Let's get you back more into your feminine, so that ultimately we come to a balance and an integration. And I think this is really what we want in everyone, is we want to find that integration and your unique flavor of integration, which might be 80% feminine, 20% masculine, or the other way around. But it's like really being able to conjure up each energy when you need to have it. Right?
Yeah.
So sometimes you need to have a conversation. You might want to bring up either the piece of it is going to be structure, piece of it is going to be heart, like,
Yeah. And yeah, I also do want to mention, since this is the perfect time to talk about it, the lineage of teaching that I primarily speak from is David Deida. But my personal teachers, the ones that I've been working with for the past year long, is John Wineland and Kendra Kunov, who a lot of my knowledge has come through them, and they're from the David Deida lineage. And fortunately, we have John coming onto the series, which is going to be incredible. He's amazing. But I did want to credit them in this intro. And also, just like side note, there's also something called energetic agility that London Winters talks about, and Justin Patrick Pierce. And this is the dynamics of moving from being in your feminine to moving into your masculine. And they refer to it as alpha omega. So if that lands better with you, you could also think about all of this as alpha and omega. But it's not to say that, like you were saying earlier, sometimes you might be 80% feminine and 20% masculine, and that can also flip-flop. So it's important to allow yourself room throughout your day, even not just throughout your life, throughout your month, or throughout the seasons, but throughout your day, to have energetic agility where you go from being primarily in your feminine, maybe you're being romantic with your masculine counterpart, and you're surrendering, you're opening your heart, you're being that deep, vast energy, blissful state. And then right after that, you've got a project you got to tackle, and you go into your masculine. You got to keep track of time, and then go, but do it through a very connected, heart-centered way. So we're going to be cleaning up a few things around the masculine too, because I think that a lot of people who are like, I'm primarily masculine, I don't know where my feminine is. I think that you might be primarily masculine, but there's also an element I notice with my clients, at least, that they're masculine, but there's also still a lot of I would say toxic feminine actually behind it, of like, I have to be perfect. I have to go in order to feel loved, feel worthy, feel this, feel that, all of these underneath things of why you're going. And so a lot of times it's not just your feminine that you want to relearn, but it's also what really is the masculine. Is the masculine really this energy of have to hustle, or is it actually more like a strong spine and being a calm warrior? So both of these energies are important to look at to see how you're interacting with them.
Yeah. And it's like, there's, I'll speak to one last thing about this, which is that, with everything, there's a distorted and a toxic version, and then there's a healthy, functional version. And so I think that that's the case. Sometimes we just say, ooh, the masculine, or ooh, the feminine. And it's really like, well, what level of it? Do you guys see this California sun? It went from it was dark, and now it's like, pew! I'm going blind. It's like reflecting off my computer screen. I'm like, where's Maddie?
It actually looks great. It's just your hair that's now glowing.
Yes, this was totally, I called my personal DP, the sun, was like, yo, what's up? I've got an interview today. Make it
Hello
happen.
on me.
So, okay, great. Are there any other pieces, like definitions or language that you wanted to speak to? I feel like we talked about patriarchy.
I think we covered a lot.
Yeah, I feel like we covered it. Cool. So as we just go into our last few minutes, do we want to get a little vulnerable and speak to what fears or hesitations come up as we're moving into this place that we've clearly outlined is a little bit outside of our comfort zone?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I am particularly fearful, nervous about, and excited to learn, but I'm nervous around making anyone feel dismissed with my own experiences, especially being me, a white woman with lots of privilege and straight. And I have not experienced a vast array of struggles that minorities go through every single day. So using my own experiences, I can only go so deep. And then going in with the guests that we're bringing on, we can only go so deep. And then I particularly have this fear around saying things wrong or not covering enough or not representing correctly or stumbling over my words. Because when I feel nervous about a topic or a new topic, I stumble over my words because my brain's trying to move so fast, and then I'm trying to like keep up with it and say things correctly and say things right. So I definitely have a lot of fears around this because it's such a big thing, and it's also a big thing that I'm just not getting into. Like my work in the Maddie Moon LLC world is all around the divine feminine masculine, and it's safe. It's comfortable. I know it. I know polarity. I love talking about it. This, on the other hand, is controversial. And then there's this part within me, like there's a part within a lot of women of the people pleasing, wanting to do it right, wanting to play it safe, wanting to make sure everyone likes it. And so I know that throughout the series, there's going to be times where I'm going to feel so triggered as fuck because I might not be liked. And I want to reframe that in my mind to be actually a powerful thing for me to be able to, I don't know if you heard this interview, but there was a woman that was talking yesterday when I was doing some of my research, and she was saying that being not liked is actually okay because you're exercising your right to have, like truly exercising your right to have freedom of speech. And it's better for people to just simply not like you than that for them to say, don't say that. Don't say that, agree with me and what I'm saying. Instead, because when someone tells you, do not say what you're saying, say what I'm saying, they are actually, especially if they're a woman, we're all like trying to uplift each other. It's actually a good thing for other people to disagree with what you're saying, especially a woman, because when a woman is disagreeing with me, she's not necessarily bringing down the feminine rising and this sisterhood we're all creating. I would rather someone disagree with what I'm saying and then leave it at that than say I'm not allowed to say that, and them saying you're not allowed to have that freedom of your own speech. Does that make sense? I'm going down a different thing. But basically those are my fears of saying things wrong and not being liked and not representing what's happening in here and in my body with my voice. So that's where I'm at right now.
You know, I mean, I'm right there with you. I think that for me, it's the whole like not getting it right fear, which I'm seeing coming up a lot in our spaces everywhere. People saying, I'm just not going to speak about it because, you know, I might say that one wrong word and someone's like, and then I'm just going to be torn down and then the end. And that's not to say that I don't welcome being held accountable for all the places where I'm going to mess up, because I will, because I am human and I'm learning this as we go. But I would rather be told, hey, this actually isn't like a term you can use, or the way that you framed this, or the person you brought on is, you know, whatever it might be that someone has an issue with, to come to me with that and to show me their perspective. I'd rather go through the of that than to stay quiet and not move us forward as humans. We need to start moving forward. And so for me, I think the perfectionism that gets really, oppressive through various systems that are at play and different dynamics that are at play, I think are stopping us from actually moving forward. And it's like saying, I'm never going to date again because I'm scared I'm going to do it wrong. Or I'm never going to launch another project because, I messed up with that one thing the way that I set it up last time, or I didn't do the sales calls right, or whatever it might be, right? Like, it's like if we are, and this is something I'm incredibly passionate about. I always talk about love-based motivation versus fear-based motivation. And I think right now we're in a world where collectively, the collective nervous system is not functioning in a healthy place. We are all dysregulated. There is just high levels of fear and I think I just recently heard someone on like an Insta story be like, why is everyone so offended these days? And just to give you context, this was a woman of color. So she was like, and a dear friend of mine, and she was like, why is everyone offended today? And by the way, I'm offended. And she was really owning that truth of that it's this and it's that. And I think that, we started a conversation, her and I was like, I think that the collective nervous system is actually just in this place where, we're so aroused, like not in the good way. We're just like ready to fight, that anything that comes to us, we're just like, we're in that defensive mode. And what we're trying to do here with these conversations is not increase that level of hyperstimulation of like, oh my God, I'm just going to... And instead do the opposite, bring us back to a place of breathing, of regulation, of opening our heart, of listening, of taking time to do what we need to do to resource ourselves, and then go, okay, let's come at this from a place of curiosity. And so I think, for me, my fear is that people aren't going to get that, and that we're going to be misunderstood, or that they'll continue to be the cycle of shaming and blaming, right? Which to me doesn't get us anywhere. So there's definitely residue of the old system and the old ways that's still coming up for me around, I need to make sure I do it perfectly, And so I think this is part of why we also wanted to bring you guys in on this conversation. I mean, other than really, it's important for us as a group to set the intention and get clear about our agreements here, but also because we wanted to just show you all, like, this is the stuff we're talking about behind the scenes, and this is what we're doing in preparation for these difficult conversations, and here's some of the stuff that's coming up for us. And the idea is to, again, create more permission, more allowance for everyone to go, okay, it's not going to be perfect, but let's try.
Yeah.
Am I still here? I can't tell with the light.
Yeah, you are still here. Your light is like shining so bright, but it's pretty. Okay, I really like the last thing that you just said, and I agree with that. You texted me before, like, when we're talking in communication, let's do maximum love. Let's move maximum love towards maximum love. And so I have a feeling intuitively that the people who listen to this, that come from my side of the world, my social media, your side of the world, your social media, all the men who are interviewing, and then anyone else who discovers this, who's new to us and new to the people we're bringing on, we want to be speaking from a place of love, and we want to hear your thoughts, and we want to hear your opinions, and we want to learn, even though it's going to be slightly hard for or triggering for us at times, maybe for us feeling like we're wrong. We are willing to move forward. So if you have something that you want to offer that we're not speaking about, or you hear we say something that didn't land right with you, and you also have a suggestion on how to make it land right, we welcome that, and we would love that, and we request that it is maximum love in the way that it's shared with us, because we are also sensitive beings. We're sensitive creatures, and we have tender hearts, and we have the best intentions. So please do share with us, and let's all share in a way of maximum love.
Yeah, and there's a way to hold someone accountable and to, really be fighting for what's real, and also to deliver in a way that's loving, I think. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we think it has to be one or the other, and it just doesn't, Mm-hmm. Can you really still see me? Because I really can't see anything.
Well, you're kind of now faded into the back, but I can
see. Guys, I'm still here. Yeah. So as we wrap up, I just want us to just talk a little bit, and maybe it could just be like really popcorn style, like what we're most excited about, because that's really ultimately, I think, the main emotion. It's like, I'm so excited.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you go first.
Okay. I want to understand how men can get more plugged into their bodies. I want to understand how they can get more embodied and connected, because I do think this is such a key tool, and it's going to open the door to a lot of healing for both of us, men and women. I'm really, really excited about that. I'm going to think about what else I'm excited about. There's lots more.
I have one that I want to share. I'm not going to share this one quite yet. I'm debating if I share this in the intro of what I'm really excited about. But one thing I'll share before that I'm really excited about is I'm really interested in anger as an emotion, because I think that there is this idea, and it's rightfully so. I mean, this is the case how it has been, that when a man feels an immense amount of anger and he shows it to his partner, let's say in relationship, it may scare them. It's scary. So I'm curious, how can men experience a crucial emotion such as anger in a way that is connected to their heart? What methods can they do to express their anger and actually release it? So going back to your talk on embodiment, how do you embody anger? Maybe in privacy, or maybe even the third one is, how do you show and reveal your anger to those who are close to you in a way that doesn't scare them, and it's not closed-hearted, but it's connected to your heart and actually opens up something within her.
Yeah.
Make anger safe again.
Yeah. I'm excited about the caliber of men that we get to chat with, because they're just phenomenal humans who are doing amazing work in the world and who are also just trying to figure it out. And I think, I want to give them props, because it can be, it could be as a dude, I imagine. I'm not one, so I have to just imagine. But I imagine like saying, hey, 2 women are going to talk to me about the patriarchy and privilege and primal sexuality. Oh, this could be not my typical podcast interview. Like, I'm not just here pitching my products and what I do and talk a little bit, it's really getting into the uncomfortable conversation, and especially having that conversation with 2 women. So I'm really excited for having these courageous, evolved men showing up.
Yeah. I am really excited to learn about non-verbal consent. Very curious about that. What is the man's work in non-verbal consent? What's his responsibility and job, and knowing if it's a yes or no, and even knowing beyond a yes or no, even if what can a man do when he hears a yes, but he's feeling into her and feels a no? How do men sharpen those intuitive skills of actually reading body language? And and I think we're going to be speaking with someone that can bring in nonverbal consent mechanisms and teachings with dance, which I'm really interested to hear about that. I'm just very fascinated by nonverbal consent right now, because it keeps the polarity alive too. Because I've heard from some people, like, they love hearing, is this okay? Like, whenever you're kissing and then you move on to the next thing, and then the next thing, is this okay? Always constantly checking in. And then for other people, the check-ins in some way stunt the polarity and the tension and the anticipation. So I'm curious about that.
Gosh, I feel like we could talk about this forever. I'll sort of throw in one more, and then maybe we'll just leave the rest to the actual interviews.
Yeah. Sounds good.
I love, for me, I'm just so passionate about, my work with women has been, how do we create safety around their sensuality? And I think that what's happening is there's this parallel thing going down with the guys, where they're not feeling safe to be in their primal sexuality now, especially after Me Too. And a part of it is like, understandably so, like, I can see how the women are like, well, yeah, now you finally have to be accountable and think about your, the consequences of your actions. And I'm 100% on board with that. And I don't want to be living in a world where all the men are like, I'm just going to be asexual. I'm just going to walk around asexual. I don't think that brings me to the best version of me. I don't think that they're walking around in the best version of themselves. And I think that there is a place, but it comes from this place of really cultivating our own safety, and safety in partnership and communication, where we can then go, I can be in my soft feminine. You can be in your powerful warrior primal sexuality, and we can find that place of polarity while still having the place of consent. Like, there is this weird divide that it has to be this or that way. okay, now the men have to be asexual, or now we, and it's like, that's not actually what it is. And so bringing that all together so that everyone can have like really hot sex again is great. I'm very excited about that.
I love it.
So good. Amazing. Awesome. Okay.
And where do we send people?
Where do we send people?
Where do we go from here? TrustingOurMenAgain.com. Or is it trustingourmen.com?
We are. So stay tuned. We're going to have the link below. We did not, as you can tell, we did not have this conversation beforehand.
Oh, no, we didn't.
Where this video is actually going to be. But either way, we're going to find the perfect place, and you're going to be watching, and we're going to give you clear instructions on what's happening next. So
absolutely.
We're just excited to have you on the ride with us. And just remember, our doors are open for all your thoughts, of course, from a loving place. It can be tough love, but still love.
Yeah. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. We look forward to hearing your thoughts on the interview series and so much more goodness to come.
Awesome. Bye.
Bye.